The real meaning behind the number 360, the title Modi's Operation 360, how close is BJP to gaining absolute power in parliament, is deliberately provocative. It does not merely ask whether the Bharatiya Janata Party can win another election. It asks a much deeper and more consequential question. Can one political formation accumulate enough power across parliament, state legislatures, and constitutional institutions to reshape the Indian Republic with minimal resistance? The phrase Operation 360 appears to refer to the approximate number of Lok Sabha seats required for a political alliance to approach a two-thirds majority in the House. The Lok Sabha normally has 543 elected seats. Two-thirds of 543 is 362. Therefore, 360 is not a perfectly exact constitutional number. It is a politically memorable shorthand for overwhelming parliamentary dominance. That distinction matters. Winning 272 seats gives a party or coalition a simple majority in the Lok Sabha. Such a majority is sufficient to form the union government and pass most ordinary legislation. Winning around 360 seats creates an entirely different psychological and institutional reality. It can place a government close to the numerical territory required for constitutional amendments, provided it also has sufficient support in the Rajya Sabha. The Constitution does not permit a government to amend itself merely because it controls the Lok Sabha. Article 368 generally requires a constitutional amendment to be approved in each House of Parliament by a majority of that House's total membership and by at least two-thirds of the members present and voting. Certain amendments affecting the federal structure must additionally be ratified by at least half of the state legislatures. This is why the video's argument is not simply about election arithmetic. It is about the gradual construction of a political ecosystem in which control over the Lok Sabha, the Rajya Sabha, state assemblies, governors, investigative agencies, legislative procedure, public, communication, and opposition parties may reinforce one another. The central fear implied by the video is that democracy can be weakened without being formally abolished. Elections may continue, parliament may continue to meet, courts may continue to function. Newspapers and television channels may continue to operate. Yet, the practical space for institutional resistance may become progressively smaller. The question, therefore, is not whether India will suddenly stop being a democracy. The more serious question is whether India's democracy could become increasingly majoritarian, centralized and electorally competitive, but institutionally unequal. 1. What does absolute power actually mean? No elected government in India possesses literally absolute power. The Constitution remains the supreme legal authority. It binds the legislature, executive and judiciary, and courts retain the authority to invalidate legislation or executive action that violates constitutional limitations. Therefore, the phrase absolute power should not be understood literally. It is better understood as a condition of extreme political predominance. Such predominance may include 5 different forms of power. Electoral power. The first is the ability to repeatedly win national and state elections. Electoral success gives a ruling party democratic legitimacy, access to state resources, influence over policy, and the power to appoint ministers and senior constitutional functionaries. Legislative power. The second is the ability to pass laws with limited negotiation. A government with a secure majority does not depend on opposition support for ordinary legislation. If party discipline is strong, MPs generally vote according to the leadership's instructions. Constitutional power. The third is the ability to amend the Constitution. This requires much more than an ordinary parliamentary majority. A government must build a broader coalition across both houses and for certain federal provisions across the states. Institutional power. The fourth is influence over appointments, administrative machinery, investigative institutions, public broadcasters, regulatory bodies, and constitutional offices. This influence need not be illegal to be politically important. Institutions can remain formally autonomous while becoming increasingly reluctant to confront the dominant executive. Narrative power. The fifth is the ability to define political reality. Who represents the nation? Who is considered anti-national? Which issues dominate public discussion? What counts as development? And which criticism is treated as legitimate? A party becomes hegemonic, not merely when people vote for it, but when even its opponents are forced to speak in the language, priorities, and symbols created by that party. Thus, absolute power is best understood as the convergence of electoral legitimacy, legislative numbers, institutional control, and narrative dominance. 2. Why 272 and 360 represent two different political worlds. The distinction between a simple majority and a supermajority is fundamental. A party or coalition needs a simple majority in the Lok Sabha to form a stable government. In a House of 543 elected members, the familiar majority mark is 272. With this number, a government can ordinarily survive confidence motions, pass money bills and budgets, enact ordinary legislation, control the legislative agenda, appoint the Council of Ministers, and govern without depending on opposition parties. But a government near the 360-seat range operates on a different scale. A huge Lok Sabha majority weakens the bargaining power of coalition allies, reduces the importance of dissenting MPs, and creates the political image that the ruling party embodies the national will. Even before constitutional amendment thresholds are reached, such a victory can produce what may be called a supermajority mentality. The leadership may begin to believe that institutional resistance is obstruction rather than accountability. Opposition parties may become demoralized. Civil servants may anticipate the government's preferences. Media organizations may adjust their editorial behavior. Business groups may become reluctant to support alternative political formations. Defections and alliances may increasingly favor the dominant party because politicians want proximity to power. This is why numbers have effects beyond voting. A parliamentary majority is mathematical. Political dominance is psychological. A party with 280 seats may govern strongly, but remain conscious that an electoral swing could remove it from office. A party or alliance with approximately 360 seats may begin to appear unbeatable. That perception can itself attract more legislators, donors, allies, and media support. Power, therefore, becomes self-reinforcing. 3. Why the Rajya Sabha is central to the argument. The title's focus on Parliament could mislead some viewers into concentrating only on the Lok Sabha. But the Rajya Sabha is indispensable to the constitutional equation. The Rajya Sabha is the Council of States. Its members are primarily elected by state legislative assemblies. It is designed to give the states a voice in national lawmaking and to prevent the temporary majority in the directly elected House from exercising completely unchecked legislative authority. Most bills require approval from both houses. Constitutional amendments under Article 368 must be passed separately by each House. There is no joint sitting available to overcome a disagreement between the houses on a constitutional amendment. That means a two-thirds majority in the Lok Sabha alone does not give a government unilateral constitutional power. However, control of state assemblies gradually affects the composition of the Rajya Sabha. Members of the Rajya Sabha serve staggered terms, and approximately one-third retire every 2 years. Therefore, victories in state elections do not immediately transform the upper house. Their effects accumulate over time. This creates a long-term strategic connection. State victories, more MLAs, greater influence over Rajya Sabha elections, stronger position in parliament, greater constitutional capacity. This is likely one of the most important ideas behind the video's Operation 360 framing. The struggle is not restricted to a single general election. It is a multi-level project involving state elections, alliances, defections, party splits, and upper house arithmetic. When a national party wins major states, it receives more than chief ministers and state ministries. It gains influence over Rajya Sabha representation, presidential elections, national political, finance, administrative networks, and the federal balance of power. This is why the decline of regional parties is constitutionally significant. Regional parties do not merely compete for state governments. They are also vehicles through which state-specific interests enter national politics. If many powerful regional parties weaken simultaneously, Indian federalism may become less competitive, even without any formal amendment to the Constitution. 4. State governments as the gateway to national constitutional power. India is constitutionally described as a union of states. Its governmental system contains both federal and unitary features. Legislative authority is divided among the union list, state list, and concurrent list. States have constitutionally recognized responsibilities in areas such as public order, police, public health, and agriculture, while Parliament controls matters assigned to the Union. However, Indian federalism has always contained a strong centralizing tendency. The Union government has substantial financial resources, residuary legislative authority, emergency powers, and influence over governors. Parliament can alter state boundaries under Article 3, subject to the constitutional procedure. The Union also plays a major role in taxation, national schemes, intergovernmental transfers, and centrally sponsored programs. When the same political party governs the Union and a large number of states, formal federal negotiations may increasingly become internal party negotiations. This can improve coordination. A common political leadership may accelerate infrastructure projects, harmonize regulations, and reduce conflict between governments. Supporters often describe this as double-engine government, the union and state governments moving in the same direction, but the same arrangement carries risks. A chief minister belonging to the national ruling party may have less incentive to publicly defend the state's interests when they conflict with the union leadership. Intergovernmental disagreements may be resolved through party hierarchy rather than transparent constitutional bargaining. State-level political leadership may become dependent on the central command for nominations, campaign resources, and career advancement. Federalism is not merely an administrative method. It is a system for dispersing power. Its purpose is partly to ensure that no single political center can easily determine every major question for a vast and diverse country. Linguistic identity, regional history, economic interest, and social composition differ significantly across Indian states. Competitive federalism allows these differences to be represented politically. If most states are controlled by one highly centralized party, the constitutional map remains federal, but the political system may behave more like a centralized hierarchy. That is the deeper meaning of the video description's warning about the quiet erosion of federalism. Federalism need not be formally repealed. It can be weakened through political uniformity. 5. The role of governors and constitutional friction. Governors occupy one of the most controversial positions in Indian federalism. They are formally appointed by the president, effectively on the advice of the union government. In ordinary circumstances, a governor is expected to act as a constitutional head, while the elected chief minister and council of ministers exercise executive authority. Controversies arise when governors delay assent to state legislation, influence government formation, demand floor tests, recommend president's rule, or become publicly involved in political disputes. These controversies do not automatically prove that every gubernatorial decision is partisan. Governors sometimes confront genuine constitutional uncertainty, especially after fractured election, verdicts or defections. Nevertheless, the office can become an important pressure point when different parties govern the union and a state. A dominant national party can benefit from this asymmetry even without directly violating the Constitution. Opposition-led state governments may be forced to spend time, money, and political energy litigating conflicts with governors or union institutions. Administrative uncertainty can slow their programs. Public disputes can make state governments appear ineffective. The cumulative effect can alter electoral competition. The opposition is not merely required to defeat the ruling party in elections. It may also need to govern under more difficult institutional conditions after winning. This is a critical element in understanding contemporary democratic power. Elections are only one stage of competition. The conditions under which elected governments are permitted to function are equally important. 6. Defections, party splits, and the expansion of dominant coalitions. A major pathway to political dominance is the absorption, division, or neutralization of rival parties. In principle, legislators are elected under party labels and ideological commitments. In practice, Indian politics has a long history of defections, factional struggles, and post-election realignments. The anti-defection law was intended to reduce opportunistic floor crossing. Yet political actors have developed methods that operate around its constraints: coordinated resignations, leadership disputes, mergers, recognition battles over the real party, and changes in alliance after elections. When a powerful national party benefits from divisions inside regional parties, the consequences extend beyond the immediate transfer of MLAs. A split can produce control of a state government, weakened opposition organization, confusion over party name and symbol, transfer of local leaders and cadres, reduced campaign finance for the rival, faction, influence over future Rajya Sabha elections, and a narrative that resistance to the dominant party is futile. This is how political expansion can occur without directly winning every mandate on its own. Legally valid maneuvers can still raise democratic questions. A constitutional democracy is concerned not only with whether a change of government follows a formally permissible procedure, but also with whether the resulting government reflects the political choice voters reasonably believed they were making. Suppose voters elect a legislator because that candidate represents Party A and opposes Party B. If the legislator subsequently helps Party B form the government, the technical legality of the move does not eliminate the representational problem. Repeated reversals of this kind can produce cynicism. Citizens may conclude that elections determine only the opening distribution of political assets, after which stronger parties can renegotiate the result. This weakens the moral authority of electoral competition. 7. Investigative agencies and the asymmetry of political risk. Another theme commonly associated with discussions of concentrated power is the role of central investigative agencies. India needs strong institutions capable of investigating corruption, money laundering, tax evasion, and serious economic offenses. Political status should never provide immunity from criminal investigation. The democratic problem arises when enforcement appears selective. If opposition politicians face frequent investigations, raids, or arrests, while similarly situated, politicians aligned with the government rarely face comparable scrutiny, the public may suspect that law enforcement is being used strategically. Even without a conviction, an investigation can transform political behavior. It can consume a leader's time, damage reputation, restrict finances, weaken party organization, and encourage defection. The power of an investigation is therefore not limited to the courtroom. A dominant government does not need to explicitly order every action for institutional asymmetry to emerge. Officials may understand the prevailing political incentives. Agencies may become more energetic in some cases and more cautious in others. Politicians may change sides in anticipation of legal or financial pressure. This creates a broader concept of political control, compliance produced through uncertainty. The opposition cannot easily prove that every investigation is politically motivated. The government can correctly argue that allegations must be investigated. The agencies can point to legal procedures, yet the aggregate pattern may still influence the political system. A healthy democracy, therefore, requires more than the existence of investigative powers. It requires transparent procedures, prosecutorial consistency, judicial oversight, and credible institutional independence. 8. Parliamentary procedure and the difference between passing laws and deliberating a government may possess a legitimate parliamentary majority and still be criticized for how it uses that majority. Parliament has at least 3 functions: representing citizens, making laws, holding the executive accountable. The third function is frequently underestimated. Parliament is not simply a voting machine that converts the governing party's manifesto into statutes. It is a deliberative institution. Opposition questions, committee scrutiny, amendments, debates, and demands for evidence are not obstacles accidentally placed in the path of governance. They are part of constitutional governance. When legislation is passed rapidly, with limited debate or inadequate committee review, the government may achieve legislative efficiency at the cost of institutional legitimacy. Supporters of a strong executive often argue that excessive debate causes paralysis. India's administrative problems are real, and governments require the capacity to make decisions. But the opposite danger is equally serious, equating decisiveness with democratic quality. A law can be passed quickly and still be poorly designed. It can have unintended effects, create federal conflict, or require later correction. Parliamentary scrutiny improves legislation by forcing ministers to defend definitions, procedures, financial assumptions, and enforcement mechanisms. A government with overwhelming numbers may become less interested in persuasion because it does not need opposition votes. This is one of the paradoxes of majoritarian government. The greater the numerical strength of the executive, the more important voluntary self-restraint becomes. Institutions cannot rely exclusively on the goodwill of leaders, But constitutional conventions often depend on political actors choosing not to use every available power to its maximum extent. When restraint disappears, formal legality may survive while democratic deliberation declines. 9. The Constitution is more than a document that can be amended. The video's title invites anxiety about constitutional amendments, but not every constitutional amendment is dangerous. India's constitution has been amended many times. Amendments have been used to reorganize institutions, expand representation, introduce new rights, implement social reform, and respond to changing conditions. A constitution that cannot adapt may become obsolete. The real issue is what is amended, why it is amended, and whether independent checks remain effective afterward. Article 368 gives Parliament substantial amendment power. But the Supreme Court's basic structure doctrine holds that Parliament cannot destroy the Constitution's foundational identity. Although the precise content of the basic structure has developed through judicial decisions, it includes principles such as constitutional supremacy, judicial review, democracy, secularism, federalism, the rule of law, and separation of powers. This means that even a government possessing the required parliamentary numbers would not necessarily have unlimited constitutional authority. However, judicial safeguards are not automatic. Courts act when cases are brought before them. Litigation takes time. Judicial appointments, case allocation, interim relief, institutional capacity, and public legitimacy all affect the practical strength of review. Furthermore, not every democratic erosion occurs through a constitutional amendment. Power can be centralized through ordinary statutes, executive rules, financial conditions, administrative appointments, control over information, and changes in political culture. A constitution may remain textually unchanged while its operational meaning changes. For example, freedom of speech may remain guaranteed, yet journalists may become more cautious because of lawsuits, regulatory exposure, digital harassment, or commercial pressure. Federalism may remain part of the constitutional structure, yet states may become fiscally or politically dependent on the Union. Parliamentary accountability may remain formally available, yet debate may become less meaningful. Therefore, constitutional preservation requires more than preventing a dramatic amendment. It requires maintaining the institutional practices that give constitutional principles life. 10. The basic structure doctrine. A barrier, not a complete solution. The basic structure doctrine is one of the most important safeguards against the concentration of constitutional power. Its central logic is straightforward. The authority to amend the Constitution cannot include the authority to destroy the Constitution. Otherwise, a temporary parliamentary supermajority could legally abolish elections, eliminate judicial review, or permanently exclude political opponents. Such actions might follow the amendment procedure while destroying constitutional democracy. The doctrine, therefore, prevents amendment power from becoming constituent omnipotence. But the doctrine has limitations. First, it depends on the judiciary remaining independent and institutionally confident. Second, courts generally review specific legal measures. They do not govern the broader political environment. Third, democratic decline may be cumulative. No single law may destroy the basic structure, but a sequence of smaller actions can weaken checks and balances. Fourth, a judiciary can invalidate a law but cannot manufacture a strong opposition. Independent media, internal party democracy, or an active civil society. Legal safeguards are necessary, but they are not self-executing substitutes for democratic politics. The strongest protection of the Constitution is a dispersed political system in which multiple actors possess enough legitimacy and organizational capacity to resist overreach. 11. Delimitation and the future balance of representation. Any serious analysis of future parliamentary dominance must consider delimitation. Delimitation concerns the redrawing of constituency boundaries and the allocation of parliamentary seats. Because India's population has changed unevenly across states, a future redistribution of Lok Sabha representation could substantially alter the balance among regions. States with faster population growth may gain greater representation. States that achieved lower fertility rates may fear losing relative political influence despite having implemented population control and development policies more successfully. This issue is constitutionally and politically explosive. From one perspective, democratic equality requires constituencies to represent approximately equal populations. A citizen's vote should not carry dramatically more weight merely because that citizen lives in a slower-growing state. From another perspective, a purely population-based redistribution could penalize states that invested successfully in education, healthcare, and family planning. It could shift national power toward particular regions and intensify linguistic or federal anxieties. For the BJP, seat redistribution could create opportunities if new seats are concentrated in regions where the party is already strong or organizationally competitive, but the outcome would depend on the precise formula, timing, reservation pattern, boundary design, and future voting behavior. It would be simplistic to say delimitation automatically guarantees one party's permanent dominance. Electoral geography can change. New urban seats can behave differently from rural seats. State identities may intensify. Alliances can reorganize. Yet delimitation could change the battlefield on which national politics is fought. That makes consensus essential. A technically legal delimitation implemented without deep federal consultation could create a long-lasting crisis of legitimacy. The danger is not merely that one party gains seats. The danger is that large parts of the country begin to believe the national system no longer reflects a fair constitutional compact. 12. One nation, one election, and centralization of political time. Another issue relevant to the video's thesis is the proposal to synchronize elections. Simultaneous elections are defended on several grounds, reducing repeated campaign expenditure, limiting disruption caused by the Model Code of Conduct, allowing governments to focus on administration, reducing voter fatigue, and creating a more predictable political calendar. These are not trivial advantages. However, synchronized elections could also nationalize state contests. When national and state elections occur together, voters may be more likely to evaluate both through the personality of the prime minister, national security, national media narratives, and the performance of the union government. Regional issues could receive less attention. Smaller parties might struggle to compete with the financial and communication machinery of national parties. This does not mean voters are incapable of distinguishing between levels of government. Indian voters have often demonstrated sophisticated split-ticket behavior. Nevertheless, campaign timing structures, political attention, a dominant national party with a powerful leader, extensive resources, and superior media reach may benefit disproportionately when all elections are organized around a single national moment. The constitutional question is therefore not merely administrative efficiency. It is whether synchronizing electoral cycles would subtly shift India from a genuinely multi-level federation toward a leader-centered national plebiscitary model. 13. Media power, digital platforms, and the manufacturing of consent parliamentary numbers are only one component of political dominance. Modern power is inseparable from communication. A government or party does not need to censor every critic to dominate the information environment. It can achieve advantage through superior advertising resources, direct-to-voter communication, disciplined messaging, sympathetic TV coverage, influencer networks, algorithmic amplification, coordinated social media campaigns, and the constant repetition of emotionally powerful frames. The BJP's communication strength has historically included centralized branding, rapid message dissemination, volunteer networks, and the personalization of national politics around Narendra Modi. This provides an enormous advantage over fragmented opposition parties that often struggle to maintain a unified message. The opposition may respond to the ruling party's agenda rather than setting its own. Each controversy becomes a defensive battle. By the time an allegation is investigated or a claim is corrected, public attention has moved. Elsewhere, narrative dominance is not the same as persuasion. It is control over the sequence and vocabulary of political debate. For example, criticism of a government policy may be reframed as criticism of the nation. Demands for institutional accountability may be described as hostility to development. Opposition coordination may be described as opportunism, while governing party alliances are described as stability. Every political party uses framing. The democratic concern arises when one party's financial, institutional, and media advantage becomes so extensive that competing narratives struggle to reach citizens on equal terms. A democracy does not require perfectly equal communication resources. Such equality is impossible. But meaningful democracy requires sufficient pluralism for voters to encounter competing interpretations of reality. 14. Is electoral dominance undemocratic? An important counter-argument must be taken seriously. If citizens repeatedly vote for one party, why? Should its dominance be considered a democratic problem? A large mandate is not inherently authoritarian. It may reflect genuine public support, satisfaction with governance, ideological agreement, weak opposition leadership, or trust in a national leader. Democracy means respecting electoral outcomes, including outcomes disliked by commentators or minority groups. Therefore, criticism of dominant party rule must avoid treating voters as manipulated or ignorant, merely because they support the BJP. A party's popularity may be rooted in several legitimate factors: welfare delivery, infrastructure, expansion, national identity, perceived decisiveness, leadership credibility, organizational discipline, ideological commitment, dissatisfaction with previous governments, or the weakness of available alternatives. The danger does not arise from popularity itself. The danger arises when popularity is used to claim that all institutional opposition is illegitimate. Democratic mandates authorize governments to govern. They do not authorize governments to erase the distinction between party, state, and nation. A government can have majority support and still violate minority rights. It can win elections and still weaken federalism. It can act legally and still undermine institutional conventions. It can accurately claim democratic legitimacy while unfairly altering the conditions of future competition. Elections are essential to democracy, but democracy is not reducible to elections. A complete democratic order also requires political equality, civil liberties, institutional accountability, independent courts, a free press, meaningful opposition, federal balance, and the realistic possibility of peaceful alternation in power. The test of a democratic system is not only whether the government can win, it is whether the government can lose. 15. Why a weak opposition is a constitutional problem. Opposition parties are often criticized for disorganization, corruption, dynastic leadership, ideological inconsistency, and failure to present a credible national program. Much of this criticism may be justified. But the weakness of the opposition is not merely the opposition's private problem. It affects the health of the entire constitutional system. A functional opposition performs several roles: scrutinizing legislation, exposing administrative failures, presenting alternative policies, representing citizens who did not vote for the government, preparing a potential replacement government, and preventing political power from becoming permanent. When opposition parties collapse, the ruling party loses an external source of discipline. Competition improves governance. A government that fears electoral defeat has a stronger incentive to correct mistakes, avoid arrogance, and respond to social dissatisfaction. A dominant party may still govern effectively. But over time, the absence of credible competition can encourage complacency, factionalism, and excessive loyalty to leadership. The solution is not to artificially weaken a popular government. The solution is for opposition forces to become more democratic, competent, and politically intelligible. An opposition coalition cannot survive solely by saying, "Stop Modi." Negative unity may produce temporary coordination, but voters usually demand a positive account of governance. A credible opposition needs a clear economic program, an approach to welfare and employment, a national security doctrine, internal leadership mechanisms, state-level organizational depth, a coherent position on secularism and social justice, and a persuasive model of cooperative federalism. Without such an alternative, warnings about authoritarianism may sound abstract compared with the ruling party's concrete promises. 16. The difference between centralization and state capacity. A particularly important analytical distinction is the difference between state capacity and centralization. India requires a capable state. It needs the ability to collect revenue, build infrastructure, regulate markets, enforce contracts, provide welfare, respond to disasters, and defend national security. Fragmented authority can create delays, corruption, and policy inconsistency. Some degree of central coordination is indispensable in a continental-scale country. Therefore, not every expansion of union capacity should be described as authoritarian. The relevant questions are: is authority transparent? Is it legally reviewable? Are states meaningfully consulted? Can opposition governments implement their mandates? Are decisions based on uniform rules? Can citizens criticize policy without disproportionate retaliation? Are institutions accountable to the Constitution rather than a political party? A strong state is not necessarily an over-centralized state. A constitutionally strong state can implement policy effectively while preserving federal autonomy. Judicial review and political pluralism. The challenge is to build capacity without eliminating counterpower. 17. The psychological consequences of perceived invincibility. Political systems change when people believe a ruling party cannot be defeated. Business leaders may avoid funding opposition parties. Civil servants may align themselves with the expected long-term ruler. Journalists may practice anticipatory compliance. Regional politicians may defect. Voters may support the dominant party because they believe opposition parties cannot deliver resources. This produces a feedback loop. The party wins elections. Victory creates an image of inevitability. Inevitability attracts resources and allies. Resources and allies weaken competitors. Weakened competitors make further victories more likely. At this stage, power becomes more than popularity. It becomes a coordination mechanism. People align with the dominant party not necessarily because they agree with every policy, but because they believe resistance is costly and accommodation is rational. This is how dominant party systems endure. The electoral process remains active, but competition becomes asymmetrical. Opposition parties technically remain free to contest, yet they face disadvantages in finance, organization, media access, legal exposure, and elite support. The most powerful democratic safeguard against this cycle is not outrage. It is credible political competition. 18. What the video's argument gets right. The strongest part of the Operation 360 framework is that it encourages viewers to think beyond one election. Political power in India is distributed across institutions and levels. Lok Sabha strength affects government formation. State victories influence Rajya Sabha composition. Rajya Sabha numbers affect legislation and constitutional amendments. State governments influence national coalitions. Governors shape center-state conflict. Media narratives affect electoral legitimacy. Enforcement institutions can influence political organization. These elements cannot be studied separately. The video's probable central insight is that democratic centralization is often incremental. There may be no single moment at which federalism dies. There may be no announcement that institutional checks have ended. Instead, each development may be defended as legal, temporary, efficient, or necessary. One state government changes sides. One bill is passed without extensive scrutiny. One governor delays assent. One opposition leader faces investigation. One media company changes editorial direction. One regional party splits. No individual event appears sufficient to transform the republic, but the cumulative pattern may alter the balance of power. This is the appropriate level at which the argument should be assessed. 19. Where the argument requires caution. At the same time, the phrase absolute power can exaggerate the ease with which a ruling party can permanently dominate India. India remains extraordinarily diverse. Electoral behavior varies by caste, class, region, language, religion, age, and local leadership. State elections often produce outcomes different from national elections. The BJP's organizational strength is significant, but it is not equally dominant in every region. Regional identities remain politically powerful. Economic dissatisfaction, unemployment, agrarian distress, leadership transitions, and coalition. Conflicts can rapidly change electoral outcomes. Institutions also retain agency. Courts can invalidate laws. State governments can resist union policies. Civil society can organize. Journalists can investigate. Voters can punish governments. Coalition allies can impose limits. Internal party factions can emerge. Social movements can force policy changes. The Constitution's amendment requirements are intentionally demanding, and certain federal changes require state ratification. Therefore, the path from a large electoral victory to absolute power is neither automatic nor irreversible. The use of dramatic language is effective for attracting attention, but analysis must distinguish among a strong government, a dominant party, an illiberal democracy, competitive authoritarianism, and a fully authoritarian system. These categories are not interchangeable. India's political future should be assessed through evidence about institutional behavior, not only through seat projections or ideological fear. 20. The most important question: can power still be reversed? The ultimate test of the Operation 360 thesis is not whether the BJP can win 360 seats. It is whether the institutional environment continues to permit a genuine reversal of power. Can opposition parties campaign freely? Can they raise funds without unreasonable pressure? Can critical media reach large audiences? Can state governments, controlled by rival parties, function effectively? Can investigative institutions act consistently across party lines? Can courts review executive action independently and in time to provide meaningful remedies? Can citizens protest without being automatically treated as enemies of the state? Can the ruling party lose an election and transfer power peacefully? If the answer to these questions remains yes, then even overwhelming electoral dominance exists within a democratic system. If the practical answer increasingly becomes no, then democracy may be hollowing out despite the continued presence of elections. This is the conceptual heart of the debate. Conclusion: Operation 360 is not merely an electoral project. Operation 360 should be interpreted as a metaphor for the pursuit of political saturation. It describes a situation in which one party attempts to become dominant, not only in the Lok Sabha, but across the entire architecture of Indian power: state assemblies, the Rajya Sabha, constitutional appointments, public narratives, political finance, and administrative institutions. Such dominance may emerge through democratic elections. That fact gives it legitimacy, but not unlimited legitimacy. The Constitution is designed to transform electoral victory into temporary governing authority, not permanent ownership of the state. A government with a strong mandate has the right to implement its program. It does not have the right to make future political competition meaningless. A responsible analysis must therefore reject two extreme conclusions. The first extreme is that every BJP victory represents dictatorship. That claim dismisses the agency of millions of voters and prevents serious examination of why the party remains politically powerful. The second extreme is that electoral victory automatically justifies every use of state authority. That claim reduces democracy to counting votes and ignores the constitutional purpose of rights, federalism, opposition, judicial review, and institutional restraint. The real question is not whether Narendra Modi or the BJP possesses power. Every elected government possesses power. The real questions are: how is that power obtained? How is it exercised? Which institutions can restrain it? Can citizens criticize it? Can states resist it? Can courts review it? And can voters eventually transfer it to someone else? The number 360 matters because it symbolizes the threshold between ordinary majority government and transformative political dominance. But numbers alone cannot decide India's constitutional future. A supermajority may amend legal text. It cannot, by itself, create public legitimacy. A party may control parliament. It cannot permanently control political history. A government may weaken its opponents. It cannot eliminate the social, economic, and regional contradictions from which new opposition eventually emerges. India's democratic survival will therefore depend not only on the restraint of the ruling party, but also on the competence of opposition parties, the independence of institutions, the confidence of the judiciary, the resilience of federalism, the courage of civil society, and the vigilance of citizens. The most dangerous moment in a democracy is not necessarily when a leader becomes powerful. It is when society stops believing that power must justify itself. That is the deepest warning contained in the idea of Operation 360. The threat is not simply that one party may win too many seats. The threat is that electoral victory may gradually be interpreted as constitutional supremacy, institutional ownership, and permanent moral authority. Democracy requires a different principle. No leader is the nation. No party is the constitution. No electoral mandate is permanent. And no government, however popular, should ever become impossible to question, restrain, or replace.